The ship was quiet. Not broken. Not empty. Just quiet. It moved through space the way a leaf drifts across a still lake, slow, steady, without resistance. Its name was Lyra. Old letters still glowed faintly on the outer hull, flickering like tired starlight. Lyra had no crew anymore. Just one soul. Her name was Islan. She wasn't a captain. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even meant to be here. She had once been a cartographer, a mapmaker of stars. Back when people still charted the galaxy by hand. Back when planets were numbered by wonder, not coordinates. Back when ships had more than one heartbeat aboard. But that was a long time ago. Now it was just Islan and Lyra, drifting past forgotten moons and the remains of civilizations too proud to last. She didn't mind the silence. She had come to understand it. The way one learns to sit beside an old friend and say nothing, not out of distance, but closeness. Stillness was her language now. And space had become her quiet ocean. One day, or what passed for a day aboard Lyra, something changed. A sound. Small. Soft. Not even a sound, really. A signal. It came from nowhere. No source. No planet nearby. No satellite. No station. Just a tone. 3 short pulses. Then silence. Then 3 again. Like a whisper calling from behind a closed door. Islan sat up slowly. She wasn't alarmed. She didn't rush. She simply walked to the console and watched the wave repeat. 3 pulses. Silence. 3 pulses again. The signal was old, the kind of old that clung to static like dust to glass. And buried in the noise was a frequency she hadn't seen in years. Pre-unification code. From before the great networks. Before the galaxy had been stitched together by relays and gates. She adjusted a few dials. Filtered the wave. Slowed it down. And then, softly, a voice came through. Not clear. Not whole. But there. Beneath the silence, light waits. And then it was gone. She sat still for a long while. Not thinking. Not questioning. Just, listening to the silence that came after. When she finally moved, it was not to run diagnostics or check her maps. It was to stand at the viewport. Beyond it, the stars drifted like glowing pollen in the dark. And far in the distance, just barely visible, was something she hadn't seen before. A shape. A curve. Not a planet. Not a station. Just a shimmer. Like light bent around something that wasn't quite there. She turned the ship gently. Set a course. No coordinates. No chart. Just direction. Toward the whisper. Toward the silence. Toward the forgotten star that had somehow begun to remember her. The object did not move. It did not rotate. It did not shine or cast shadow. But it was there, just outside the edge of perception. The way a dream lingers in the air when you first wake up, not fully gone, not quite real. Lyra crept closer, slow as breath. Islan made no announcements. There was no crew to inform. No command to issue. Only a thought, softly spoken to the ship itself. We'll glide. The ship obeyed, like an old animal that knew its rider's weight by heart. Days passed. Or what felt like days. Time aboard Lyra had long stopped matching any planet's rhythm. Instead, Islan measured time by feeling. By the slow stretch of starlight across her window. By the cooling of tea left untouched. By the number of times she had dreamed the same soft sound. 3 pulses. Silence. 3 pulses again. The shimmer grew clearer. Not because it moved, but because Lyra's angle of approach changed. It wasn't a structure. Not in the usual sense. It had no panels, no lights, no orbiting debris. It was a smooth shape, large, slow-curved, like the underside of a massive shell. And its surface moved. Not in motion, but in pattern. Lights shimmered across it, faint and shifting, like reflections on water. It didn't hum. It didn't pulse. It waited. Island felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not fear. Not excitement. Just curiosity. A quiet itch in the mind that asks, what story sleeps here? She brought Lyra to a full stop. Engines silent. Systems idle. The ship drifted in the shimmer's shadow. There was no gravity to speak of. No pull. No push. Just presence. Then the signal returned. 3 pulses. Silence. 3 more. But this time, the wave changed. It split. Like 2 threads winding together. A second tone joined the first, lower, slower, almost melodic. And hidden within it, something new. A series of coordinates. Island narrowed her eyes. Not planetary coordinates. Not galactic grid points. Internal positions. As if the shimmer had rooms. She stood. Not in haste. Not in fear. But in knowing. She reached for her EVA suit. Not to prepare for danger, but for communion. Because this was not a mission. It was an invitation. As the suit sealed and her visor cleared, she spoke aloud to Lyra. Stay here. Wait for me. The ship gave no reply. But she felt it. The soft pulse of lights along the bulkhead, the way old systems whispered like wind in leaves. She stepped into the airlock. Tethered herself. Opened the outer hatch. And drifted into the dark. Toward the shimmer. Toward the unknown. Toward the place that had remembered her name, before she'd ever spoken it aloud. Island's feet never touched the surface. There was no docking bay. No hatch. No doorway. Just the shimmer, a smooth arc of ever-shifting light. She floated slowly, guided only by the tether linking her back to Lyra. For a moment, she thought nothing would happen. Then the shimmer changed. It opened. Not mechanically, not with noise or panels or gears. It unfolded. A soft ripple passed through the air in front of her, and the shimmer parted like mist in morning sun. No air escaped. No warning lights flared. Only a quiet sound, like cloth brushing stone. An opening. An invitation. Inside, there was light. But no source. It was warm, not bright, but golden. Like lanterns behind thick glass. Island drifted inside. And the shimmer sealed behind her, without a sound. What she saw wasn't a corridor. It wasn't a room. It was space. Not outer space, but inner space. A wide chamber, circular, with walls that curved away forever. The surface around her shimmered with soft patterns, not just lights, but shapes. Symbols. Waves. Arcs. Constellations drawn by a hand not quite human. And in the center of the chamber, floated something that looked like a seat. Not a chair. Not a throne. Just a raised platform, curved like a crescent moon. It spun slowly, as if it had been waiting so long that it forgot what stillness felt like. Island floated toward it. Her tether drifted behind her, still connected to Lyra, but she no longer looked back. Everything in this place felt gentle. Soft. Thoughtful. Like stepping into a library at night, with books that whispered instead of creaked. She placed one hand on the edge of the crescent. Nothing happened. Then her fingers sank into the material, not through it, but into it, as if the surface had agreed to let her pass. A hum moved through her bones. Not sound. Not electricity. Just presence. And then the chamber spoke. Not with a voice, but with memory. Suddenly, she was not in the chamber. She was somewhere else. Standing in a wide field under a lavender sky. The grass was silver. The wind moved like music. And in the distance stood tall shapes, towers, trees, blinking with slow lights. A voice spoke behind her. This was the last one. Island turned. No one was there. Only the wind. The voice continued. We stored what we could. The others didn't want it remembered. But you came back. She tried to speak, but her voice didn't work. The memory wasn't finished yet. The vision faded, gently, like fog melting under sun. And she was back in the chamber. Hand on the crescent. Suit intact. Heart slower than before. Then she understood. This place wasn't a ship. It was a keeper. A container of what once was. A memory built into space itself. And now, it had chosen her. Her voice came softly through the suit's comms. What do you want me to do? The shimmer along the walls responded. 3 pulses. Silence. 3 pulses. Then, a new shape formed. A doorway. And beyond it, more light. Island drifted forward. She did not resist. Because some memories do not want to be hidden. They want to be dreamed again. The doorway shimmered as Island passed through. It wasn't made of metal. Not stone. Not energy, exactly. It felt like passing through a dream, the moment you realize you're not awake, but still walking forward. Beyond the door, the corridor curved gently upward. There were no lights. But there was no darkness either. The walls glowed faintly, like moss under moonlight. And as she drifted along the path, Island began to hear things. Not with her ears. With her memory. Do you remember the first drift? The voice was not familiar. But it was gentle. Ancient. We crossed the veil before your kind had named their stars. We left not to escape, but to remember differently. The voice faded. Another took its place. This one higher, like wind through reeds. We didn't build ships like yours. Ours were vessels of thought. Each traveler carried their own archive, a library wrapped in the quiet of the self. But we couldn't hold it forever. Island didn't try to answer. She just listened. The corridor opened into a chamber, smaller than the last, but deeper somehow. It felt hollowed. Like a bell that had rung 1,000 times and now sang with silence alone. Floating at the center of the room was a sphere. Perfectly still. Dark as onyx, but not reflective. When Island drifted close, images moved across its surface. Not fast. Not sharp. Just soft ripples. A city made of glass and cloud. A mountain shaped like a question. A sky where stars moved in spiral patterns, humming in time. Then came voices again. But this time, they whispered as if standing beside her. We stored everything. Every world, every name, every goodbye. But we were too slow. Too careful. They didn't want to forget. We didn't know how to let go. Suddenly, the sphere cracked, not broken, just opened. Like a seed splitting. Inside was a light. Not bright. But alive. And the moment she saw it, Island remembered something. Not from this life. Not from her maps, her charts, her quiet journeys. Something older. She whispered aloud. I've seen you. Not here. Not in space. But in dreams. In stillness. In the space between waking and sleep. The light responded. Not in words. But in warmth. A soft wave passed over her, like a memory brushing against her skin. And then came a pulse. Not of energy. Of invitation. 3 pulses. Silence. 3 more. And a feeling. Go deeper. Another doorway formed. Not straight ahead. Not behind. Above her. She floated upward, slow as breath. And as she moved through the new threshold, she heard a voice, not old, not alien. Her own. I never left. The passage upward did not feel like climbing. It felt like falling, gently. Like a feather drifting backward through time. Island floated through a thin shimmer, and when she emerged, she was standing. Not floating. Not in her suit. Not even in space. But barefoot, in a long hall lit by hanging lanterns that burned with no flame. She looked down at her hands. They were younger. No scars. No calluses. No wear from years spent tracing maps. She was not dreaming. She was remembering. The hall stretched into the distance, lined with alcoves. Each held a chair. Each chair was different, some made of wood, others of crystal or vine or pure shadow. But all were occupied. By people? Not exactly. By echoes. Each figure sat in perfect stillness. Eyes closed. Hands resting gently. Breathing, or perhaps simply being. Some appeared human. Others did not. One shimmered like water caught in moonlight. Another had no form at all, just the suggestion of a person wrapped in silver thread. A gentle hum filled the air. Not loud. Not rhythmic. Just present. Like the sound a memory makes when it's ready to be felt. Island walked slowly down the hall. Her footsteps made no sound. As she passed each seated figure, she felt brief impressions. Joy. Sorrow. Hope that had lasted longer than any lifetime. Fear that had never been spoken aloud. None of the figures moved. But she sensed them seeing her, not with eyes, but with recognition. Then she reached the center of the hall. A large, circular space opened before her. In its center was a tree. Ancient, glowing softly, its bark the color of starlight. It had no leaves. But hanging from each branch were tiny orbs of light. They pulsed, faintly, like slow heartbeats. And above it all, floating without string or anchor, was a symbol she did not know. A spiral, turning inward forever. The hum grew warmer. And then, without a voice, a thought entered her. These are the last of us. What remains of the drifted? We stored ourselves here, not as beings, but as memory. Island didn't reply. She simply stood before the tree. The orbs began to shift. Each moved softly down, like falling fruit, and hovered just above her hands. She raised her palms. One by one, the lights touched her skin, and with each touch, she felt a story. A journey. A choice. A farewell. She began to weep. Not from sadness. But from a kind of knowing that had no name. And then, one orb remained. It was dimmer than the others. Flickering. Struggling. She reached for it. But it pulled back. Not from her. From something deeper. This one is yours, said the thought. It's been waiting for you. The orb touched her chest. And suddenly, she remembered everything. The first time she saw stars. The first time she feared being alone. The way she had once stood under a real sky. Not one printed on ship glass, and wished to know what came before it all. She remembered the dreams she'd had as a child, of floating through light without fear. Of hearing 3 tones in the dark. She sank to her knees beneath the tree. Let the orb rest against her heart. And in that moment, the hall faded. The chairs. The figures. The hum. Only the tree remained, and her. Together. She whispered. I understand now. You didn't want to be saved. You wanted to be remembered. And somewhere deep in the roots, something ancient stirred. Not to wake. Not to rise. Just, to know it had not been forgotten. The orb slowly faded into Island's chest. Not absorbed. Not vanished. Joined. She could still feel it, a gentle warmth, like someone's hand resting just over her heart. And though the grand hall had vanished, though the tree no longer stood around her, the feeling remained. She was back in her suit. Floating, slowly, inside the core of the vessel. But something had changed. The chamber was brighter now, not from lights, but from presence. Soft shapes formed around her, like drifting petals of mist. Each one shimmered as it passed, not quite touching her, but brushing gently against her thoughts. They were not ghosts. Not data. Not hallucinations. They were fragments. Of memory. Of being. Of stories once told in the quiet of the stars. And then, she heard them. One at a time. I was a gardener on a world made of glass. I sang to the sky because it was the only thing that listened. I built a boat that could never float, but still, I waited for the tide. We loved, even when time forgot us. Each voice was quiet. No fear. No urgency. Just sharing. Like friends trading secrets in a darkened room, knowing the night would keep them safe. Island floated among them. Not trying to catch. Not trying to hold. Only receiving. And as she drifted, the voices began to gather into shapes. Petals forming flowers. Stars forming constellations. Pieces, becoming something whole again. Then, one voice came clearer than the rest. It was hers. I am not alone. Not anymore. Suddenly, a pulse moved through the vessel. Not like before. This was not invitation. This was transition. The chamber dimmed. The mist folded inward. And a path formed ahead of her, a corridor, circular and lined with what looked like windows. Each window showed a world. Some green, some gold, some blue, some hollow. Some still alive. Some long gone. But each one shimmered with the same light as the orb in her chest. As Island drifted forward, the voice returned, not in her ears, but in her mind. We cannot return. We were never meant to last. But you remember. And that is enough. The corridor narrowed. Became a chamber once more, smaller now. In its center was a pod. Not a bed. Not a coffin. A vessel. Large enough for one. Its surface bore the same spiral from the Hall of Echoes. And next to it, a light. The same kind she had seen earlier. Waiting. She placed her hand on the pod. It opened, slowly, silently. Inside, a space for rest. No wires. No glass. Just softness. A place to carry dreams. She didn't need to be told what it was. This was how the memories traveled. Not by transmission. Not by files. But by carriers. One by one, drifted into the galaxy. To sleep among the stars. To be found. To be remembered. To bloom again. She whispered. You want me to carry them? The thought responded. Only if you choose to. Island looked back, even though there was no behind in this place. She thought of Lyra, still waiting. She thought of all the maps she had drawn, all the stars she had charted, never knowing that some stars whispered back. She stepped into the pod. It held her gently. Cradled her. Not to freeze. Not to forget. To carry. To drift. To seed. As the pod sealed, a light passed through her mind, a last gift. A vision of a garden. But not on any planet. Floating in space. Petals of starlight blooming across the dark. Each one, a memory. Each one, a name. And when the ship finally released her pod into the quiet black, it did not weep. It simply turned. And vanished. Back aboard Lyra, lights flickered. The tether snapped gently, as if released. And the ship, old, silent, loyal, turned its course toward nowhere. Carrying no one. But having fulfilled its last purpose. Island drifted. Sleeping. Carrying 1,000 stories. And beyond her, the galaxy breathed. The pod moved without propulsion. No engine burned. No beacon blinked. Yet still it drifted, drawn not by gravity, but by intention, ancient, quiet, and immeasurable. Inside, Island slept. Her body still. Her breath slow. But her mind was open. And the memories inside her began to listen. They listened to the dark. To the soft hum of cosmic rays. To the whisper of wind from orphaned moons. They listened for life. And when they found it, not through sound, not through signal, but through feeling, they reached out. The first world was a quiet one. A planet of amber grass and low clouds, circling a red dwarf star. No cities. No roads. Just a single tower, long abandoned, standing in the wind like a question without an answer. The pod drifted close, not landing, not touching. And something beneath the soil stirred. Not awake. Not aware. But remembering. Within the tower, dust shifted. A carved stone, worn by time, began to glow faintly. Not from light, from memory. Symbols reappeared on its face. A map. A spiral. 3 dots. A pulse. The people who had once lived there were gone. But their sky changed that night. A new star twinkled just above the horizon, soft, steady, unfamiliar. And in the dreams of a child yet to be born, a garden of starlight bloomed. The pod drifted on. It passed a derelict station, lost in orbit above a broken world. Its lights had been dead for centuries. But as the pod drew near, one panel sparked. Just once. Long enough for an old voice, buried deep in corrupted data, to echo through the empty halls. "We are still here." Then it was silent again. But not the same silence. A remembered silence. Further still, the pod moved into a field of shattered satellites, relics of a war fought by machines long since rusted. Most were little more than debris. But one orb drifted close. An observation unit, shaped like a pupil. It scanned the pod. Found no weapons. No commands. Only a pulse. 3 short beats. The unit paused. And then, deactivated. Not broken. Surrendered. And beyond even that, the pod passed a world made entirely of crystal. No inhabitants. No atmosphere. But inside its core, light refracted in a pattern never before seen. A message. Repeating. Waiting. And as the pod passed, the crystal changed tone, a soft chime, like a lullaby. Inside the pod, Island stirred slightly. Not waking. Just, turning. A smile touched her lips. She dreamed of the tree. its branches heavier now, its roots reaching further. And around it, people sat again. Not as echoes, but as presences. Their eyes closed in peace. Their voices humming low. Waiting for someone else to find them. To remember them. To listen. The pod continued. Across light years. Through systems unnamed. Past stars that had forgotten how to shine. And everywhere it went, it left nothing visible. No monument. No trail. Only the feeling of a story rediscovered. A breath held, then released. The stars thinned. Where there had been thousands, now there were only a few. No maps included this region. No chart, no fleet, no explorer had ever returned from these coordinates. They called it the Hush, a part of the galaxy where sensors failed, and signals never echoed back. Ships steered wide around it. Stories said time folded here. Others said it simply stopped. But Island's pod did not turn away. It glided forward, slow and patient, guided by something deeper than navigation. Not a signal. Not a command. A pull. Ahead, the darkness began to shift. Not a star. Not a void. A shape. A sphere. A planet. But unlike any before it. It had no orbit. No light from any sun reached it. And yet, it glowed, faintly, softly, like a pearl lit from within. Its surface was smooth, dark silver, with patches that shimmered like glass under moonlight. As the pod neared, gravity gently pulled it in. The descent was silent. Effortless. Like a dream being drawn back into sleep. Island's eyes opened. Not wide. Not startled. Just slowly. Calmly. She looked through the pod's viewing field. And without speaking, she knew. This was the end of her path. Not her death. Not an ending. But the final chamber of a story long forgotten, waiting for its last page. The pod touched down on a smooth surface. No dust rose. No wind moved. But the air, strangely, was breathable. Or rather, the pod made it so, as if the planet and vessel had agreed, together, that she should continue on foot. The hatch opened. She stepped out. The ground was warm. The sky overhead was starless, but not black. It shimmered with slow-moving light, like deep water lit from below. All around her, strange structures dotted the horizon. Tall, elegant. Not buildings. Not machines. They resembled stalks or spires, grown, not built. Their surfaces reflected not her image, but her memories. She saw herself as a child, tracing constellations in the sand. She saw Lyra. Her maps. Her solitude. She saw the orb, the glowing seed from the vessel, resting in her chest like a second heart. She walked. Not far. Not long. Until the ground curved downward into a shallow basin. At its center stood a tree. Not like the memory tree from before. This one was smaller. Leafless. Pale. But alive. Its roots pulsed with slow light, and its branches stretched toward the sky in perfect stillness. Beneath it sat a figure. Shaped like a person. Wrapped in cloth woven from silence. No face. No eyes. Just presence. Island did not speak. She sat beside the figure. For a long time, nothing passed between them but breath. Then, without turning, the figure said, "You have come far." Its voice was old, but kind. It did not echo. It did not rise. It settled softly, like falling dust. Island nodded. "I didn't know where I was going. I only followed the quiet." The figure tilted its head slightly. That is where all stories live. In the quiet between stars. They sat together beneath the tree. And the figure said, "This is where we ended. When the drift collapsed. When the last of us chose memory over fear. We planted our final root here. Waiting for someone who would not conquer, or question, or take. Only, remember." Island looked at the tree. Its branches trembled. And then, slowly, a bloom emerged. Just one. A soft, silver flower, opening with no sound. The figure stood. It reached into the tree and pulled from it a small object. A second orb. Dim, flickering. "This is the last voice," it said. "The one even we could not carry. But you can." Island took it in her hands. It was cold at first. But then it pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. She closed her eyes. And felt the final memory enter her. A song. Not in any language. Not meant for ears. A song sung by a people who had let go of the stars, not because they gave up. But because they believed someone else would one day listen. And now, someone had. The flower on the tree glowed brighter. The air grew warmer. And across the surface of the planet, light began to travel, root to root, stalk to stalk, spire to spire. Not fire. Not signal. Memory. Blooming. Returning. Island looked at the figure. What happens now? The figure smiled. Or perhaps the world smiled through it. Now, we drift again. Together. The light moved slowly across the surface of the planet. It touched each silent spire, each crystal root, each patch of the smooth silver earth. And everywhere it passed, stillness shifted into awareness, not consciousness, not sentience, but a kind of remembering. A hum returned to the air. Soft. Patient. Steady. Island stood beside the tree with the final orb still pulsing in her hands. The figure who had given it to her had faded, not vanished, but folded back into the quiet. As if it had been waiting only to pass along the last page of a long, forgotten book. Now, the world was silent again. But it was a different silence. A living silence. Island turned and walked from the tree. The pod that had brought her was waiting just beyond the basin. Still. Open. Ready. She stepped inside. The moment she sat down, the pod sealed itself, not with a hiss or a clunk, but with the soft hush of a door that remembers being opened and closed 1,000 times. The orb rested gently beside her. She closed her eyes. And the pod lifted. As it rose above the surface of the planet, light spilled behind it, not from engines, but from within. A trail of gentle glow, spiraling into the dark. The planet slowly turned, revealing more of its surface. Now marked not by structures, but by patterns. Spirals. Symbols. Lines that curved like vines across the land. It was no longer hidden. It was seen. The pod drifted beyond the hush. Back toward the edge of mapped space. Toward stars that still blinked in loneliness. But as it passed them, they seemed a little warmer. Planets once forgotten, moons long considered barren, blinked softly as Island's presence passed near. Not as if she brought light. But as if they had simply been waiting for someone to look their way. Inside the pod, Island dreamed. Not of places. Of people. Not just the drifted, but of everyone who had ever reached for something in the dark and waited, quietly, for an answer. She saw a child tracing spirals into the dust on a moon with no name. She saw a traveler beneath a broken sky, whispering a lullaby to themselves in an ancient tongue. She saw hands reaching out, never grasping, only offering. And then she saw herself. Not as she had been. As she was now. A vessel. A keeper. a lantern in the dark. At that moment, the pod released a signal. The first true signal it had ever sent. Just a whisper. 3 soft pulses. A pause. 3 more. Then silence. But across the stars, old devices blinked to life. Not loudly. Just enough. Old satellites turned toward it. Ancient libraries stirred. Forgotten AI, quiet and crumbling, activated their listening ports. And in quiet corners of distant stations, screens flickered. On them, a spiral. A pulse. A line of text in no known language. And people began to wonder. They didn't panic. They didn't fight. They listened. And slowly, they began to remember. Stories told long ago. Symbols from old murals. Whispers passed between generations. They didn't understand it. Not fully. But they felt it. Something had returned. In time, explorers began to speak of a trail, a quiet path through the galaxy. A drifting light. A dream shared across systems that had never spoken to each other. Some followed it. Others simply dreamed it. But all felt it. The drift was awakening. Not as a people. Not as a place. As a memory. Alive. Gentle. Patient. Waiting to be remembered. And still the pod drifted. Through nebulae. Past abandoned stations and sleeping planets. Carrying Island. Not alone. But with all of them. A garden of memories, blooming slowly across the stars. The pod floated far from any known system now. Not hidden. Not lost. Simply beyond. Drifting through a stretch of space where the stars burned slow and soft, like candles at the end of a quiet vigil. Inside, Island rested. Her breath steady. Her body still. Her thoughts, wide. Not racing, not loud, but open, like a calm sea at dusk. And within that sea, stories moved. Not in order. Not by name. Just as feelings. A lullaby from a world made of water. A farewell whispered in a tunnel carved from ice. The quiet determination of a child drawing maps no one else would ever see. Outside, the pod glowed gently. Its trail stretched behind it like a thread of light, almost invisible, but unmistakable to those who knew how to look. And somewhere far behind, in systems once dark and forgotten, new flowers bloomed. Not made of matter. Not grown from soil. But felt. A shared story. A pattern returned. A presence no longer waiting. On distant worlds, people began to speak of dreams they didn't understand. Of symbols seen only in sleep. Of voices not quite their own. And some, quietly, curiously, began to drift. They left their colonies, their cities, their crowded stars. Not in haste. Not in fear. Just in search. Of silence. Of peace. Of that same 3-beat whisper that now echoed in the stillest places of the void. In time, no one spoke of Island by name. She didn't become a hero. Or a prophet. Or a figure carved into the walls of temples. She became a path. A hush between notes. A warmth in the deep black. A soft suggestion that nothing truly ends, not light, not thought, not memory, if someone, somewhere, is willing to carry it. And so she drifted. Far from time. Far from noise. Her pulse gentle. Her story quiet. Carrying not the past, but the space where it could be remembered. Above her, stars blinked. Not loudly. Not quickly. Just enough. Like lanterns hung for those who wandered late. Like breadcrumbs left by kindness itself. And in the dark, the drifted dreamed. They dreamed of trees with silver leaves. Of songs sung to newborn moons. Of spiral staircases carved into planets that spun too slowly for clocks. They dreamed of returning. Not to take. Not to rule. Just to be known. To be felt. To be remembered. As the pod passed one last slow-moving star, its surface mirrored the shimmer of the spiral deep within the orb in Island's chest. And then, with no fanfare, no sound, no blaze, it blinked once. And bloomed. A light soft as breath. A star born of memory. And in that warmth, Island slept. Safe. Carried. Known.